All right, great. So we are live and we are going to start to admit folks. And I think more people should be coming on as we move along. So, all right, so we'll just have a couple minutes because people are starting to come in, as you might be able to see. So welcome everyone, just give us a minute and we'll be starting our program with the fabulous Dr. Sotero. And I believe she is currently spotlighted, so we can see her loveliness. And I'm going to add my spotlight to here as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming today on a Friday afternoon to join the Weglyn Endowed Social Justice Series. I am so excited to welcome into our virtual home Dr. Maya Sotaro, who has been a longtime champion of peace, justice, social justice, and an incredible role model for leadership endeavors, especially for women and underserved communities and young leaders as well. I am Mary Camille Danico, the director of the Weglyn Endowed Chair for Multicultural Studies. And I did want to start off with our own land acknowledgement. In our virtual world, we are zooming in from multiple spaces and places, but Cal Poly Pomona is the home of the Weglyn, and it is the home of the Tongva tribe. And so I am going to talk a little bit more later on and hand it off to Maya about where you're residing. So I won't get into that for this moment, but please be prepared to share, where you are, where you're coming from. The Michi and Walter Weglyn Endowed Chair Series has been such a humbling and wonderful program for all of us who are part of it, largely because we have the fortune and the blessings of being able to invite and include some incredible leaders and scholars and thinkers into our virtual space. And Dr. Sotero obviously is one of them. I know that Michi and Walter would have loved to have met Maya, primarily because, like her, they were a huge advocate and champions for peace. As Walter was a survivor of the Holocaust and Michi was a survivor of the internment, both of them championed for underserved communities, not just Jewish communities and not just the Japanese communities, but all oppressed groups. With everything that's happening today, with the most recent unsettling shooting and murder of yet another young Black life, I think this is something that we really need to think about. How to restore ourselves? How do we gain a sense of not necessarily normalcy, but some sense of peace? And with Earth Day in April and with everything happening today, I really couldn't think of anyone just so perfect to bring to our virtual room today to talk about peace and restorative justice. Dr. Maya Sotero is a faculty specialist at the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. It is also a place where I graduated and I received a certificate for the conflict resolution from the Matsunaga. So it's such a wonderful program. And she was an interim director there for a little bit and a faculty associate. She received her master's degree from NYU in education and her PhD in multicultural education from the University of Hawaii. She has been a tireless leader, faculty, mentor, an educator in the areas of multicultural education, social studies methods, peace education for both graduate and undergraduate levels. She has an intensive hands-on, high-impact learning style and mentorship styles, and her expertise, lends to a multitude of course offerings such as leaderships for social change, history of peace movements, peace education, conflict management and education. And she really has pioneered, in my mind, many of the ideas on hands-on, things that you can take away with you, especially for women and underserved communities. She is the co-founder of the Seeds of Peace, which creates peace building action plans, workshops for educational families and community leaders. She's also a part of the Institute of Climate and Peace, which promotes effective and inclusive processes to build peaceful climate conscious futures for all. And she also has created the Peace Studio, which trains content creators in peace building. She also serves and advises the Obama Foundation and works closely with the international team to develop programs in the Asia Pacific region. And she has organized and led that group at sponsoring some incredible leaders from around the world, and particularly of Asia. She is committed to developing tomorrow's leaders. And I think she does this by really focusing on the present. She is such a mindful and present and engaged person that to build a better tomorrow, she invests in today's leaders and emerging leaders. And so with that, I am so excited to offer this warm welcome to Dr. Maya Sotero. Welcome, Maya.
Oh, mahalo, Mary. I am an enormous fan of Mary Udanico and the Weglyn Endowed Chair. I wish to offer thanks to you. I am grateful for all that you have done individually and as a program to advocate. Your work with community is so appreciated. Your thoughtfulness and commitment to social justice is incredibly powerful, so needed, and I and others are grateful. I would like to ask that those of you who are live streaming, as well as those of you who are here with us today, there's some students, I think, to please share with us your land, your water. Where are you coming from? If you can, those of you who are here and who are able, perhaps put it in chat so I can get a sense of where you are. Now you can speak to your water, your land, either metaphorically or literally, and your water may be indeed a place of soothing where your spirit is bathed, or it can be the Pacific in which you went surfing this morning or something. So, but just take a moment and do that, please.
And Maya, I just noted on Facebook as well that if folks who are watching right now live streaming on Facebook to also feel free to comment on there, and I'll be happy to put that on the chat and transfer that over for folks who can't be with us in the Zoom room.
Beautiful. Now I come to you from Manoa today. That is the land on which I am sitting. I, of course, have to acknowledge that this is an indigenous space whose people are today identify as Native Hawaiians or Kanaka Maoli, Kanaka Oiwi. The aina on which we gather is located on the ahupua of Waikiki in the moku of Kona, on the mokupuni of Oahu. And I am in the middle of the Pacific waters. The ocean here connects me to the place of my birth, Java in Indonesia, and also to all of the places where I work to uplift incredible leaders all around Oceania and Asia. So we have folks in chat coming from Taiwan, from Rialto, Idaho, San Diego, Pasadena, San Gabriel Valley, Upland, California, Whittier, Cambodia. That's beautiful. Welcome, and I'm really glad to have you here, and really grateful that we can kind of take time and create space together. I hope that you remember your water, wind, fire, and earth as you do your work. We have been at the center of so many storms, and so I'm happy today to be able to consider with you how we can move through these storms with grace, without harm, with a feeling of steadiness in our canoes, with practices like mindful loving kindness that help us not only to move inward, but also get in touch with the pain of others, to get out of rage and grief to greater resilience and courage, to move beyond fight, flight, and freezing. We obviously need to be agitated, given all that is happening, but also need to create with a vision of the future and not get trapped in small spaces. So I hope that this hour and a half together can offer creative exploration that allow us to feel that sense of urgency, but also move forward, even through moral injury, with courage and determination to see what's possible in terms of our connection, our freedom, and our contribution to community and to our water, wind, fire, and our earth. Because of course, tranquility is not freedom from the storm, but peace within it. So with that, I would be so grateful, Daniela, if you would pull up a little PowerPoint, and we can use that as a reference point to have some conversation and share some thoughts. Mahalo again, with gratitude to this wonderful program and its students and faculty and staff. Next. So we'll look a little bit at sort of leadership styles and conflict transformation, restorative narrative, and some strategies for personal peace and interbeing. Thank you. Next. I really think that all sorts of leadership styles are at play right now. We are seeing a lot of autocratic leadership and have seen in the last few years. We also see some laissez-faire leadership. I think that we are hopefully moving into a time with more transformational and democratic leadership. I will say that autocratic leadership is probably embedded in many of us at times. For instance, as a parent, we might sort of say, do this and not offer enough explanation. I believe in democratic leadership, even in parenting, only insofar as I like to listen carefully and reflect and engage in storytelling and probe and question. But there are times when an assertive and somewhat autocratic form of leadership is both efficient and effective. But I think that we have seen entirely too much of it. I also feel that some folks have been kind of hands off. And I believe that part of that is we have given up sometimes. We have felt that things are hopeless, and we have let go, preferring to not be upstanders and to think about critique as leadership. I think that it's important that we do critique, but I also think that we need to all be solutionaries. So if we are in a space of critique, and if we engage in kind of a laissez-faire leadership when it comes to the systems, I want to encourage us to at least hold space and create opportunities for those who are finding solutions to build those solutions effectively. I do believe that this is a time for transformational leadership that looks to social justice, that looks to movement building. And we are, of course, able to engage in movement building with much greater agility. We have the capacity, all of us now, to blog, to vlog, to self-publish, to create podcasts, to reach out across great distances, to feel through pain and sorrow, to create art, to understand one another, to fight on behalf of one another. And I hope that we can engage in transformative leadership, both at the local level, but even at the global level. Democratic leadership is something that it has been imperiled, and I want to renew our commitment to it, knowing that democratic leadership looks different in different spaces, and we can ensure that our democratic leadership is not just about representative democracy, where somebody is ostensibly representing us with our best interests in mind, but in fact, we are inviting people to the table who have yet to be understood. People, we need to cast our net widely. We need to make sure that we are being truly inclusive. And programs like Weglyn are helping us to understand how to do that. We need to be intersectional. We need to think about whose voice is missing. We need to ensure that new folks are invited into the room, and that we are conscious and aware of where we have been making assumptions. So often we have been operating as advocates with good intentions, but we have ignored this principle of, nothing done for us without us, right? And even the best of us have made this mistake. I was building leadership capacity for one of the nonprofits I started called Peace Studio in New York City. And I do encourage all of you to go to Peace Studio's website, and you can hear from some of our creative peace builders. We had 100 offerings of peace during the pandemic year, and we just started a series of courageous conversations. We had a powerful dialogue yesterday with the descendants of Gandhi, King Mandela. We're working with journalists and so forth. But when I was building up some leadership capacity in the early years, I had 75 incredible peace leaders in the room, and I was so inspired by them, and realized after talking about the importance of doing this for young people in order to build capacity for the next generation, that there were only 3 people under the age of 25 in a group of 75 in the room. And I think that this sort of thing is all too common still. We forget that young people, for instance, have skills, capacities that sometimes exceed our own, speaking from my generation as a 50-year-old woman. And we are all too patronizing sometimes when it comes to those who really have insight and courage that we need. So we need to have intergenerational duets. We need to think about how to be more truly intersectional. Next slide, please. I think that this is a really important time to think about a new kind of leadership that is specifically for getting through storms. I do like this quote, which my Seeds of Peace co-founder, Carrie Yarosevich, shared with me. This American writer, Walida Imarisha, said, "A storm can be used to let go of that which was keeping us from growing in new directions." It is an important reminder for this time. Next slide, please. Here in Hawaii, of course, and I should have put perhaps the hokulea there, but we'll do for the next time. but we think a lot about sort of canoe travel, and our theories of change invite us to look at the island destination where we are heading, and then to think about who and what we need to put in our va'a, in our canoe, and how we can get through doldrums and rough waters, and how we might need to reroute if the seas are rough, and listen carefully to the water, the beings within it, and of course the winds. So navigational leadership, I believe, is what we need for this time. This wayfinding leadership is leadership that can be undertaken by anyone. It requires a deep curiosity. We don't know exactly what we'll face along the way. Sometimes we don't know what we will encounter once we arrive. It requires that sense of connection. We're together on the va'a, and we have to cooperate to navigate safely. And if one boat overturns, we perhaps have to bring it closely aligned to our own. It's collaborative, it's interconnected. We hold multiple sources of wisdom and knowledge and information with us, and we carry our ancestors who are wind behind us, carry community and nature. We have to act with courage, and sometimes we have to course correct or rediscover our course once clear skies allow for it. Next slide, please. I want us here today, especially the students, especially those of you who are kind of thinking about your own navigational leadership and stories, to think also about your conflict style. Conflict is not something that we should avoid. It is necessary. It's how we hear that something is amiss, and there is a lot that is amiss. We have to embrace it. I want us to think not about avoiding conflict, but rather embracing it in order to engage in conflict transformation. Now, sometimes conflict avoidance might be necessary, just like that's a more autocratic style for a moment, and it's related to negative peace, right? Negative peace is simply the absence of conflict. So if you are in a place of, it's like Cold War, right? And if you're a place of conflict with someone with whom you are living, maybe to get to a space of that allows for deeper dialogue, you have to engage in momentary conflict avoidance. But that is not going to serve you well for very long. And compromise might be necessary, but compromise is not necessarily very satisfying for long. Once again, compromise allows you to get through a period that is fraught, allows you to move through the storm. Competing style, similarly, can help you to elevate, take your work to the next level, but pretty soon will have you in a place of deepening conflict, and will involve likely harm down the road as you butt heads with others, or as you come to feel yourself to be lacking if you lose in this competition. So a collaborative style, which is found in the center, is the ideal style for navigational leadership, for transformational and democratic leadership. But it is, I think, important for you to think about where your strengths are and where your gaps are. Next slide, please. I want you to think about, as part of that conflict style, how you communicate with others. NVC, or nonviolent communication, is something that you can learn readily online. There's a lot of free information available to you. It begins with universal needs and an understanding and consideration of what our universal needs are. And if you begin with the other person's universal needs in mind, there is always a space for sustained dialogue. Now, universal needs should not be conflated with pathways to achieve those needs. It's not about, money is not a universal need. Money is a pathway potentially to achieve security, to have choice, to have freedom, but it's not itself a need, right? So universal needs are non-controversial needs. We know that everyone is entitled to these needs. You're not going to say, hey, you don't really need love. You don't really need hope. You don't really need learning, right? Those are universal needs. And we know that by virtue of being human, a person is entitled to those needs. They can be emotional, physical, spiritual, structural, philosophical, or social. And they help us to fill in the gaps in our stories about the other. If we first consider the other person's needs, we see their humanity more fully, and we can ally ourselves to them more readily. So ask yourself, in a place of conflict or in a place of communication, what does this person need? To give you just a very basic example, if you are arguing with your beloved about money, at that moment, perhaps, if two people are arguing, the other person might feel burdened with worry. And what they need is a sense of connection or freedom from worry. And maybe the other person needs to feel loved and more valuable and treasured than money, right? And so they have different needs in operation. With an acknowledgement of those needs comes an ability to recognize the moment or space or pathway forward. Now, just because you recognize the other person's needs does not mean that you don't hold the other person accountable. If that person has greater power, for instance, a police officer who engages in police brutality, violence, or murder has responsibility to change behavior and to cease that conduct, right? So just because we are trying to understand what, a person or a category of person needs at a particular moment to find a pathway forward to greater justice and transformation in reimagining the police force or defunding the police, does not mean that we don't have expectations or that that person isn't responsible or accountable for, change. It means only that you begin to recognize a shared space for dialogue. Next slide, please. The 4 steps of NVC are observation, careful listening, double listening. Now, double listening really means listening between words. It means listening for meaning, means listening to understand. Careful listening or double listening sometimes means you reflect back what the other person is feeling, wanting. Try to validate or confirm your perceptions. It means that you try to refrain from judgment at that moment. You share your feelings calmly in relation to what you observe. You clear the way to bring in an understanding of those universal needs, and you make clear requests which enrich or allow for that pathway forward through the storm. Again, those requests should be viable, they should be concrete, and that's a little bit redundant. I say possible and doable. I think I meant to say possible, meaningful, and concrete. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is all an important part of restorative justice or practices. The word restorative justice is very often aligned with sort of Western processes. Restorative practices brings in sometimes more of the informal or sometimes indigenous practices. So both are used. And these are problem-solving approaches that focus more on relationships and community building, as opposed to simply restitution. It's an approach to justice that focuses on the needs of both victim and offender, and counters the no tolerance policies. Restorative justice for me was really critically important when working to engage in decarceration work, particularly with youth, and to consider, sort of challenging these zero tolerance policies that turned schools back in the 90s and post-Columbine into, excuse me, into places where the kids were looked at with a lot of mistrust. My feeling is that restorative practices are sorely needed right now. Again, restorative practices should not take away the need for systemic change. Restorative practices are not, practices that suggest that we do not need accountability, that we do not need equity, that we do not need protest, that we do not need, that anger does not serve a purpose. It is simply about thinking about how we move together forward through particular storms. Next slide, please. Conflict transformation is to envision and respond to the ebb and flow of social conflict as life-giving opportunities for creating constructive change processes that reduce violence, increase justice in direct interaction and social structures, and respond to real-life problems in human relationships. And I wanted to just read that because it's a very dense quote, but from the book of Conflict Transformation, but it helps to underscore that this is about process, and it is about direct interaction. It's also about social structure and justice and human relationships. Next slide, please. These are some examples of restorative justice practices that I encourage those of you to learn more about if you don't know already, as part of your multicultural work. With the caveat again that things like ho'oponopono, these are very much grounded in culture. So, here in Hawaii, it's beautiful when Kanaka Maoli, Kanaka Oiwi, Hawaiian folks are learning about ho'oponopono, but you want to be sure that you are learning from someone who has been given the right to share, who is Hawaiian, who because sometimes there is unfortunate cultural usurpation in ways that is not knowledgeable, not respectful, and therefore not useful. That doesn't mean that you can't be inspired by it. It means that you want to make sure that that you do not have people taking ownership of processes and language that to which they're not entitled, and you know, for which they don't have the proper understanding and respect. But I do believe that there is a lot in indigenous wisdom, and so I put it here, that can be used as inspiration for us all, and that can be used to amplify the fact that we already have in so many communities so much knowledge, so many practices that are valuable, that are highly functional, that are necessary, that are wise, that are both complex and adaptable for so many situations, that enable us to find solutions that are embedded in our communities, and to have a strength-based approach to our cultures, to our communities, to think of these communities and spaces as places not simply of suffering or shortage, but as places of knowledge, as places where there are great gifts, where there's much learning. Dr. Danico has put a lot of information here in the chat for those of you who are here, about Ho'oponopono, the meaning of the word itself, Ho'o, to make, and Pono, right. The repetition of the word Pono means doubly right, or being right with both self and others. And there's other materials about the Hokulea and the Worldwide Voyage, because I referenced that, as well as links to the Peace Studio, the one of the nonprofits I co-founded. Thank you for that. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you today is that because, you know, all of the injustice, the unfair conditions, the challenges of this time, the houselessness, the food insecurity, the poverty, the racial violence, the lack of change in systems, the climate change, can make us feel a sense of apathy or fear and deep grief. We have to ensure that we are not simply crying tears of sorrow and outrage, but also finding spaces of gratitude and joy as we work together as advocates, as activists, as educators, as students, as we're learning. I think about navigational leadership, and I think, of course, about water and how it can seem ineffectual, and yet over time it carves its own pathway through stone. And you are all incredibly strong, but you also need to engage in robust self-care so that the work that you do as leaders and future leaders, you're leaders already, I don't say future leaders. I think you're leaders, all of us can lead from wherever we are, regardless of our position, our age, from beside, behind, from beneath. I'm not a top-down leader, I'm a bottom-up sort of leader, and all of us have the capacity to ignite change, to invite people to think, to create shifts in perspective, to help others to stay strong, right? To help others to deepen their sense of meaning and purpose. And so we are all leaders. We can all connect, we can all act, we can all care and help others to care. So, but we all need to care for ourselves as well. And being an upstander is hard work. And we have to ensure that we are not falling into a place of disrepair in body or spirit. So I wanted to just share a few very quick ideas for self-care. I do engage in 2-minute meditations every single day. So there's so many ways to do secular meditations. It's not religious, so it can be utilized by people of every faith, but there is value in using a worry stone, finding a flat stone or anything that feels good to the touch. The idea of rubbing it is a somatic strategy. So many of us try to use simply our head to intellectualize the process of reaching greater peace and reducing stress, talking ourselves out of anxiety. That does not work if we are not addressing our bodies. There is a physiological, obviously, impact to stress. We all know that stress kills, and yet we ask each other and ourselves to calm down as though it's simply an intellectual exercise. Finding our way to calm requires that we redirect that physiological process. And so doing physical exercise, especially that connects left and right side, that addresses the breath, is really critical. Using a worry stone to rub as you breathe helps to deepen that breath and arrive at a place of calm faster. Similarly, Amala meditation. Amala are the beads that a lot of Tibetan Buddhist meditators use. There's a mother bead on the end. I should have brought one, sorry, but that is where you begin on the end. I'm sure you've seen just the beads, and there's a tassel. You begin there. It's 108 breaths all the way around. And you rub one bead per breath and all the way around. Now that's not a 2-minute one, but you can also just do that for 2 minutes. You can also do a 2-minute meditation that is about looking outside and watching things in motion for 2 minutes. Watching the clouds, watching the leaves, watching a bird, watching anything in motion helps you to connect with the sort of rhythms of nature. You can do a 2-minute meditation that is about closing your eyes and feeling the ground beneath you, feeling with all of your senses, smelling, tasting the air, seeing, touching for 2 minutes. You can do a 2-minute walk as slowly as possible. See how slowly you can go. So these are things that don't necessarily take a lot of time. I also put here some guided meditation apps. There are so many. I put here those that are free because you are students, many of you. And these sites often have a sort of basic free series, and then you can pay to kind of get a fuller bundle, but there are at least some that are free on all of these. Calm, Insight Timer, Stop, Breathe and Think, 10% Happier, Smiling Mind, and UCLA Mindful. Other mindfulness activities are 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. which are just, again, about using the senses, identifying and naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Again, that double listening where you can go out into nature and listen, on either side, listen for things down low and for things up high, listen to someone with whom you're in conversation, and then try that exercise of understanding what they are feeling. I put here fragmenting. This is something that I did when my youngest daughter was having night terrors. And someone helped me who was a music teacher, and he had me listen to 5 songs and consider in those 5 songs where I was being taken down the stream. Some of the songs were beautiful, some of the songs were aggressive and, hardcore and passionate. Some of them were rhythmic and made my body move. Some of them were soft and lilting and, and then he had me listen to all 5 songs again, but this time think of them just in terms of a single note. Now, 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 now. And fragmenting those songs to think about a single note helped me to not be carried down the stream, but to think of the sound as little drops of rain on my cheeks. And this was what I could do with my daughter's voice to avoid contributing to her stress, to avoid my worry, because I had been coming from a place of fear as she was screaming, would I be able to make her happy? Would she ever be a happy person? Which thankfully she is today. But, this idea of fragmenting is something we can do if we get stressed, if we get fearful about, what is happening with, anti-Asian hate, or with, another, beautiful young Black life being taken away and killed by police fire. If we get angry, frustrated, sad, one of the things that we can do is we can find ways to kind of, as we engage in activism, think just in terms of mindfulness. What is this moment, this opportunity as we are working with one another in community? Can we find in the voices, in the faces beside us, in solidarity, can we find a measure of sweetness, or at least resilience, where we're not carried down a place of too much anxiety? Same, if we're worried about climate change, or if we're worried about COVID, if we're worried about this pandemic and all of the losses, so that we can remain standing. There is a real movement now towards embodied social justice. There is possibility for a lot of connection around that. And the idea with embodied social justice is that our bodies have not been in a place of health, and they've not been cared for, and they have not been loved properly. And so as part of social justice, we must learn to do that for each other and for ourselves, right? And so the idea is to find activist joy and celebration and healing and health. And it's grounded in a strength-based approach that thinks about, dance and movement and yoga and movement building and solidarity and community building, building homes, and all of that as part of and the work that needs to happen going forward. And Zephanie, I'm not sure if you're on this call, but she was sharing some resources with me, and I think it's something that we really have to think of as a critical part. Alec was also sharing some of those resources. He's a yoga teacher, and I think that if we do not learn to see our voices as spaces of healing, then we perhaps will flounder in a place of trauma and not be able to move from trauma to growth. And we want to see that post-traumatic growth, right? So actually using voice and body for growth and healing is really critical. There is a lot more now in the way of scientific study that is being devoted to the mind-body processes, and one can find that very often the body is a pathway for intellectual and spiritual healing, and somatic work or bodily work is exceedingly valuable and necessary to bring us to a place where we are not spiritually traumatized. Next slide, please. Oh, so this is just this is a video. If you can play it, it's made by fourth graders. So the reason I bring it to you is because it's a reminder that fourth graders have great wisdom, and some of this is their natural response, and only some of it is scripted, and it will give us a little bit of an activist break.
I'm not sure if you can hear it, so please let me know if you can or cannot.
And when my brother hits me a lot.
We can hear it. Can you put it in full screen?
You don't want to play with me. When I'm mad, my brain can get a headache and it can start hurting. Your blood keeps pumping because you're like really mad. And you start to get sweaty because you're getting really, really mad. And then when you start getting really mad, you turn red. When your body can't really control yourself, mad just takes over your body. I just get out of control. It's kind of like if you had a jar and then the jar would be your brain and then you put glitter in the jar and that would be how you would feel. If you shook up the jar and the glitter went everywhere, that would be how your mind looks. And it's like spinning around and then you don't have any time to think. And you sometimes punch stuff and people when you don't really mean it. When I get angry, I feel it in my heart. I really don't like when I get angry. The amygdala really reacts, but the prefrontal cortex tries to keep it down. When I feel like I want to, get really angry and yell, I just sometimes, take deep breaths. First you find a place where you can be alone, then you find some way to relax and calm down. When I need to calm down, I take deep breaths. I breathe in through my nose. Sometimes I close my eyes or just take deep breaths. It's coming down, it's not moving. It's slowing down and then it stops. And the heart pumps slow and then it goes into your brain. sparkles are at the bottom of your brain. My brain like slows down, and then like I feel more calm, and then I'm like ready to speak to that person.
I always feel a little calmer after I watch those kids. And it just, trying to underscore that again, it just doesn't take too much, but we really have to ensure that we are giving ourselves that moment. And I wanted to say, just like conflict, anger serves a purpose, right? It's a healthy emotion, and we feel it because something is wrong, and it's an important part of um, our work as advocates and as peace builders and as those who are working towards justice. But we need to re-engage our breath when feeling that anger, so that we can find not only the true source, but also then channel that anger into productive action, rather than having it make us sick, right? And so really spending time to breathe first, and then articulate what you wish could happen instead, and then what you learn from the anger, and how you're going to take that learning and make good use of it. To say that out loud, to write it down, and to share it with others is really key. Next slide, please. I wanted to ask you folks to engage in a sort of river of life activity with me. If you can, wherever you are, take a piece of paper and draw a river. It can be curly, it can be straight, but just draw a river down in the middle of your page. All right. Now on the left side of that river, I want you to put all of the things that make you sad, all the bad things, all the difficult things, all of your struggles, all of your sorrows, all of the hurts, all of the disappointments, all of the pain. Put all of that on the left side of the river. Take 60 seconds. Okay, now on the right side of your river, I want you to put all of the good stuff, the positive, the pleasant, your successes, all the celebratory, joyful, happy, delightful things in your life so far. All of the positive, all of the magnificent, all of the peak stuff. Take 60 seconds. Okay, now I want you to put in the middle of your river everything that helps you to cross from the left side of your river to the right. So put all of, perhaps it's community, all of the things that give you strength, family, maybe it's faith, maybe it's your friends, maybe it's a particular, book or poems or music. Perhaps it is a place, maybe it's a philosophy, maybe it's your internal character or quality, maybe it is education, anything, your family, maybe it's a particular voice or leaders, maybe it's tools or strategies or resources, but anything that gives you strength to help keep you afloat, to help keep you buoyant. That goes in the middle of the river. Take 1 minute. And so the idea of this particular activity, which I did in Dharamshala with the United States Institute of Peace with young leaders in their 20s who came from conflict spaces, is that we all have things that help to keep us strong and resilient and buoyant. We have to realize all that we do have in our communities, in our spaces, in our cultures. We need to find the strength to language it forth, so that we as leaders, as activists, can feel not only a sense of pride in those resources, but also to continue to stay afloat and to find ways to continue crossing from the left side of the river to the right. And so draw upon that activity, keep adding to the things inside the river, keep considering all that you have in your lives today and all that you might want to place there to help keep you strong and resilient. Next slide, please. I just wanted to say that this work is so joyful for me. I feel drenched with gratitude to be able to look at peace in a very multifaceted way. It's not some tepid, soft, unformed, simply abstract thing, peace. It's about action. It's multifaceted. It's strong. It's hard work. It's connected. It's communal. And so these are some of the organizations. The Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution is where I work at the University of Hawaii. And Seeds of Peace, Peace Studio, and ICP are the 3 nonprofits that I co-founded with exceptional other humans. I do hope that you explore them. There are free resources on each of these and open source toolkits for educators, for family, for community members, for artists, for creatives. And I really hope that you can become a part of my forever family, all of you who are listening and all of you who are here today. I'd love for you to put in the chat any thing that you feel to be central to your definition of peace building. Again, remembering peace is not about simply the absence of conflict. That's negative peace, but it's positive peace building. It's the presence of infrastructure and justice and human rights and indigenous peace and environmental justice and personal peace and conflict management and mediation and negotiation and decarceration and it is restorative practice. It's so much a part of what we should be doing regardless of our profession and our age, right? In my view. But can you please put down there in the chat, what is your definition of peace building? Thank you. Just take 1 minute and I'll read them out loud, or some of them. And next slide, please, Daniela. Don't be shy, folks who are here. Please put down your one thing that is peace building to you. It doesn't have to be the definitive thing. Community building, coalition building, empathy. Great. Self-development, coping, quieting the mind, unity, finding balance in life, self-love. Ensuring that folks have the safe space to speak their truth, knowledge, their stories without judgment, so that we can get to a sense of understanding. Empathetic space. These are all beautiful definitions, and I thank you for sharing them and for sharing this time with me. This is, my hope is that you consider, just what is one thing that you can do to activate your definition of peace building in community. So however you define peace, what is just one thing that you can do? Being able to articulate sources of tension and coming to a place of resolution and understanding. Yeah, beautiful. So what is one thing that you can do today, tomorrow, in the weeks ahead, so that you begin to identify yourself as a peace builder? There is so much to do, right? And this is a time when we have to be brave, we have to be strong, we have to focus not simply on what we have lost during this pandemic and all that has transpired in those months, but we have to have a strength-based approach, right? We have to think about our gifts. We have to care for each other, rather than simply feeling badly or poorly about the situation, right? And so again, even though anger, frustration, worry can be assertions of self-worth, and many have had good reason to be angry, and protest is important, what are some other things that we can do to be solutionaries? How can we choose not to be paralyzed by inequality, exploitation, and violence? How can we honor and respect the messages of the anger so that the anger can be our teacher and we're not getting overwhelmed by it, and we're practicing leaning into our discomfort and doing something, with that? How can we take those moments of sadness, frustration, vulnerability, and allow them to grow to help us to become more resilient? How can we look at sorrow or death and neither glorify or deny those experiences, but then use them to create a certain intimacy with the bad, in order to recognize our own strength, and then remember that life has not forgotten us and still holds us in its hand, and that we're not alone, that we are connected, right? And that we can do things to act, and we can save each other, And so I love some of the things I see here in the chat. We can reach out. Let's create innovative opportunities to care for one another, let's create space and community. Let's articulate sources of tension, come to a place of greater understanding, educate myself on hardships endured by communities, not just my own community, but other communities too. Let's listen to people who are being directly affected. Let's shine a light on them rather than speak over them. Let's educate those around me. Beautiful. Thank you for those suggestions. I'm very, very grateful, and would love to have you continue with these strategies and these suggestions, and to think of breaking up your activism into both guiding star and near star strategies. And there is a program called Smallify, which is Dave Viotti leads it here, and we did it. The Institute for Climate and Peace did it, and the idea was to sort of have ways to smallify our activist practice so that we do not get overwhelmed by it. You have to have that guiding star. You have to articulate it. You have to be brave. You have to have lofty goals, and be big in your thinking, but then you also have to have those near star, you have to have those tangible steps. And those are things that you do on a daily basis. And those are ways that you can break things down and backward mapping step by step. So I want to share, I mentioned before the canoe travel as a way to build our theory of change. The one that we use for Seeds of Peace is called, it's I guess, planting metaphor, or gardening metaphor, agricultural metaphor. I don't know what you want to call it, but Seeds of Peace begins with imagining our harvest. So when you imagine your harvest, you think about what is the growth that you want to see in the world, right? What do you want to see bloom? What does that look like? What are the colors? What are the smells? Who does that feed? And then you think about preparing the soil. Now, in preparing the soil, you have to pull the weeds too, right? So you are thinking about maybe getting rid of those barriers to peace building, right? And whether those are, habits of mind or mindset, maybe those are structural barriers, maybe those are informational barriers, maybe those are logistic barriers, but those are you pulling the weeds, you're preparing the soil, making the ground fertile. Maybe part of preparing the soil is thinking about thought partners. Maybe it's about finding that language. Maybe it's about considering your content or your curriculum. Maybe it's about building that movement, right? That's preparing the soil, getting those resources. And then you have to plant those seeds. Those seeds can be tools, it can be actions, it can be resources, right? You plant those seeds, be whole programs. And then you have to think about how to nurture to sustain ongoing growth and future growth. When you are planting, right, you want to make sure that you're keeping your soil healthy for future seasons. So that is a sure way to think about those near star and guiding star goals, right? You want to have those specific and demonstrable strategies as part of that backward mapping and metaphor. So whatever your theory of change as activists and advocates, as leaders, make sure that you do that backward mapping and that you get real granular, real specific, as well as visionary. So thank you. I want to leave the last 15 minutes for questions, as well as Rose and Thorn. Rose and Thorn, if you go back to that last slide, is just basically where each person shares the rose, like the best, part of their day. I do it with the family. at dinner time, and then the thorn is the thorniest part, the hardest, the most challenging, right? Something to do with organizations, with groups, with classes, but the rose can be, you know, about the year. What is the best part of the year for you? What is that sweet smelling thing? Or it can be about the last hour. So you can take and expand to a large period of time or a short period of time. But I wanted you to think about maybe some, I'm not sure that we can share one-on-one here today, but if you do have any roses or thorns, please put them in chat. And I wanted to leave the last 15 minutes for questions. And so the rose and thorn that you would put in chat is, you know, kind of what are the things that have come up for you, the happiest things that have come up for you in the last hour or day. And the thorn is, you know, what is something that you think is challenging or difficult in the last hour that I have made you think about, or in your day before me too. So again, thank you so much for this time. And if anyone has questions, I'd love for you to share them either in chat or or feel free to unmute yourselves and come on the screen. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. You know, I think I echo the sentiments of several folks who've been direct messaging me, saying that they just feel so much more calmer and ready to lean into their anger and, you know, really be present and focus. And so some of the folks had to leave because of other meetings, but people have been messaging me and saying how much they've really enjoyed this hour with you. And they're always so inspired by what you have to offer. And there is something so special about you, Maya. And I've said this to you before. And I don't just say this because we're friends and I adore you, but there is something about you where you make us feel so much more calmer and so much more centered every time you speak. But for me personally, and I'm not sure about everyone else, it also makes me want to do something. You know, there is that hope. There is that feeling of things are possible. And it's okay to lean into this anger. It's okay to feel the way I do. And I just love that. I just love the exercises that you had us kind of reflect on today and to share. And so I do welcome any folks, if you have questions or comments, and if you would like to, you know, just say hello to Maya, you know, feel free to, you know, come on and just let us know what your thoughts are, what you're thinking about, and how this session, you know, worked for you and how it felt for you. I know that, you know, because she has been doing this for so long, people often don't realize the impact that their work has on so many of us. So if you have any inkling to share, you know, how this last hour meant for you or what it felt for you, please feel free to share.
Thank you, Miriam. And I really am having to, as we wait for those who want to share or who have questions to muster up the courage, I have to say I really am grateful for you, and I think you're such a badass, wonderful, strong. You know, you're fierce, but you're so nurturing, and that's precisely what we need. You know, you really believe in the power and brilliance of your students and the young people in your life, and your, not just in your program, but in so many of the spaces. And I think we both share this feeling of ever-growing optimism and courage in the face of, you know, seeing how determined and creative young people are today, and how their capacities are ever enhanced by, I think, this determination to connect and to be entwined and collaborative and intersectional. And they really are inviting others, and they're listening and paying attention. And I'm so buoyed and bolstered by our young scholars and this generation. And thank you for supporting them so well.
No, thank you, Maya. I mean, they're easy to support. We do have some incredible, students here. And one of them who's on, I don't want to embarrass her, but she just received one of the Weglyn Awards for social justice. And so she's on here as well. And we have some awesome alumni here as well. Dina's here, and she's been coming to a lot of the sessions. And some of our leaders in our group, our peer mentors, and our faculty and staff and colleagues who are here as well, and from folks from other parts of the country. And just so you know, there are people who have shared this video on Facebook Live 25 times already, and so maybe more, I haven't looked. So there are people who are actually watching on Facebook Live, as well as there are those who are in this room. But yeah, if you have a comment, or if you have a statement or a question that you would like to initiate with Maya just for the last 10 minutes or so, please raise your hand. You can use the emoji sign. Even just saying hi. I think Dina actually did. Dina, did you meet Maya when you were here in Hawaii?
Yeah, I did actually. Whoa, that was a couple of years ago, but it was such a pleasure to meet you in person, and also just a pleasure to meet you in this virtual space. And just thank you for again, I want to mirror what Mary said, or Professor Danico said, in terms of just feeling very calm and grounded and hopeful in terms of just becoming a more well-rounded advocate, activist, and just trying to be able to navigate the way moving forward. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you again, and I very much appreciate you and your voice and your work. I want to say that you wrote in the comments that your rose has been a feeling of hope and greater empowerment. And if I may say that your thorn is that you still have some anxieties and self-doubt about getting out there. And I wanted to share that with your permission. I mean, I didn't ask beforehand, but I hope that that's okay. My bad. But just because I think that others are going to feel similarly, I think that there are others who are going to doubt that that they have things to contribute, or we're not going to feel brave necessarily about getting out there, or who are going to wonder if there are those who will listen or pay attention, or if anything will change, and so I wanted to say that it's brave of you to acknowledge that vulnerability. I don't have any doubt that you are making a difference, that you are making an impact, that even voices who are somewhat quiet, like I was listening to Helen Zia yesterday, who was around, and part of the movement during Vincent Chin days, when there were all these protests after he was killed. Folks that his murderers thought he was Japanese and blamed the Japanese for the economic downturn because of the Japanese auto industry's competition, right? But she was saying that she felt always very shy and didn't feel a sense of charisma or dynamism, but somehow she stepped out and forward and found her voice getting stronger and thickening and being a critically important one at a time of great need and filling a gap, and so I think that the way to address that anxiety is to lean into that discomfort and to move forward, and to trust that by virtue of caring, by virtue of your earnest interest and desire to make things better, that you are in fact going to make a difference, and your voice will matter. And you stay steady and consistent in that. In terms of restorative justice, there are a great many different voices, because, as I said, there's so many different practices that are part of restorative justice. Many of them are grounded in the kind of formalized judicial system that are, or extrajudicial. Some of them are part of school programs. Some of them are part of indigenous practices. So I would say that I will send some possibilities to Professor Janiko, but also I think you'll find some great ones if you do just a search online. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. We have time for one more if anybody wants to ask or make a comment. Yeah, Kelly, if you can also just kind of put in the survey that we would like folks to fill out afterwards, that would be wonderful, just to get your input and feedback about today. I think, during these stressful periods, having an opportunity to kind of name it and acknowledge it, and then also to really think about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the various strategies that you've shared with us to kind of really not necessarily manage it or make it go away, but really to acknowledge it and to be present and to find ways to debrief ourselves and to breathe. I love, as soon as you said breath, I messaged one of our students who's on right now, because when he was in Hawaii with me, we did meditation in the morning, or we did, some breathing things. And it totally has saved me even before the pandemic, in terms of just meditation and yoga practices and things like that. And the exercise of just being able to jot down, as someone who had to leave, saying that just being able to name it and just being able to say, these are the things that pains me, and these are the things that gives me hope, and these are the ways that I'm going to kind of work toward it, the bridges between the rivers. I think it's just like a lot of visual imagery, but also really practical and mindful ways of approaching the challenges that we have right now, and the multitude of stresses that we have right now. So I can't thank you enough, Maya, for spending this time with us and, just sharing your energy and your love, with our community. And I just can't wait until we can bring you back onto campus again, when that time happens. And, but yeah, I don't think we have a lot of questions. I think Dina, you answered Dina's question. I think Octavio mentioned what was his rose and what was his thorn.
Daniela had her hands.
Oh, okay, great. Daniela, I'm sorry. I'm really horrible about seeing those hands because my eyes are old, but
no worries, no worries.
And Daniela is one of our, one of our Weglyn Award social justice recipient this year. So we'll be having her face on our website very shortly. So congratulations again. But yeah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for talking to us about this, and I realized all the things I want to learn, moving on from this workshop, and I especially like the river activity. I really enjoyed it, just reflecting, and I feel like with our fast moving world, it's hard to just sit down and reflect. So I really enjoyed it, and definitely will be passing it along to other people. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much, and congratulations, and really appreciate you very much. I think that a lot of what I try to do, just in keeping with what you were saying is earlier, is that a lot of what we need to do sometimes is to wash our eyes. Thinking of water, and a phrase that I use a lot, this idea of seeing this moment in new ways, and finding new possibilities that are created in the gaps, in the even given the losses that Octavio mentions as his thorn, that that in this time, and through the storm, we are going to encounter many losses, but there is an opportunity, of course, to revisit. The big word of the year has been reimagine, perhaps overused, but really important still, right? And to think about how we can think of ourselves in new ways, think of this time in new ways, you see one another in new ways, understand our resources, our community, our cultures, our strengths, our character, and this moment anew, so that we can build towards new possibilities and find our way across that river. I think, there's so much potential inherent. That's not just silver lining thinking. I think it's really pragmatic. And I really thank you, Daniela, for being a brave student of social justice, but also a great actor. And I love seeing all that stuff that you wrote down in your River of Life activity. And I hope that that's part of that, you washing your eyes in that river. And thank you all for this time. Really, really appreciate you.
You're mute, Dr. D.
Thank you so much, Maya. And thank you for everyone who was able to join us today via our virtual Zoom room, as well as Facebook Live. It will be up on YouTube later on through the Weglyn website, as well as in the Weglyn Facebook page. Look forward to connecting with all of you in the future, and definitely look forward to giving Maya a big hug and, seeing her hopefully in the very near future. So mahalo plenty, and we will see you all later on. Thank you again for coming, everyone.
Thank you. Aloha.